Good afternoon. My name is Travis Minok, and I'm the chair of our commission. I want to thank you for your application and interest in serving as a circuit court judge. If you could give us a little bit about your background, experience, and what qualifies you to be a circuit court judge.
Yes, sir. First off, thank you. I apologize for the delay, but I appreciate you working me in. Didn't mean to waste anybody's time today. As far as my qualifications, I have been a practicing lawyer in the state of Florida since 1997. Graduated law school in 1995, so I've been doing this a minute. My actually first 3 jobs in the legal field all involved clerking for judges. I was a law clerk for 2 years of my 3 in law school. I was a law clerk immediately thereafter in a trial court for the summer. Following that, I was a law clerk in the Court of Appeals for 2 years. And then when I first moved to Florida, my first job here was clerking for circuit court judges. I was a staff attorney for almost 4 years before I became a prosecutor. I've handled at the criminal level just about every type of case you can imagine, really everything up and down the ladder. And in my capacity previously as a law clerk, of course, we had to deal with everything that came in the door, so there involved some civil cases and some things. And recently, this past year, I had to administer my dad to state, so I started to dabble in probate law, sort of unwillingly, I had to do it. So I've got a little bit of exposure to that. I have applied before. I have tried many cases to jury, as well as argued some cases from back when circuit judges used to hear appeals from county court. Argued a few of those. And so I believe that given the breadth and the length of that exposure, that these are jobs, it's always hard for me when I hear a question about why should you be a circuit court judge. It always sounds to me a little bit self-aggrandizing if I try to trot out there and say that sort of thing. I want to try to be a little bit humble about it. I think humility is a quality that most judges really need. And so to answer that question, I said, well, somebody's got to fill these positions. That's why y'all are here, spending more time. So I think if people have to fill them, that I would be a qualified candidate to do so.
Do you have a judicial philosophy, and if so, what is it?
Philosophy. Well, usually you start with, I think the popular phrase, the way to phrase it is just a textualist, an old-fashioned textualist, rather strict interpretation of that. When I say that, I mean the text as it was written and understood at the time it was written. I've had that philosophy for, so once it became apparent to me that the law was subject to that sort of manipulation by interpretation, I started to learn about what and how, from some of the first judges I clerked for, especially at the Circuit Court of Appeals, how judges can approach it differently. That's the path that I chose.
What do you think makes someone a good judge?
I'd like to answer this. Socrates kind of put out 4 qualities that I think pretty much encapsulate it fairly well. That's you listen attentively, you decide soberly, you question intelligently, and you rule impartially. Those things, I think, the deliberative nature of the process, the impartiality of the process, and the respectful and sober consideration of litigants before you. Most everybody's day in court before a circuit judge is a bad day for someone. And sometimes that includes the judge, because some of those decisions are painful and difficult to make. So I would say those are the qualities that I think make a good circuit court judge.
You mentioned humility a few minutes ago. Talk to me about that.
Yes, sir. I think it's easy when you're in the advocate role to kind of get caught up in having to come out on top. That is, the prosecutor, you temper that, you have to do the right thing. But it is often, I think there's a tension between the role of an advocate when you have people who are pushing you for certain results. You want that, as opposed to the judge needs to approach things, I think, a little more soberly.
What do you think is the biggest strength in you as a candidate for circuit court?
biggest strength I would say is just, I have seen an awful lot of what happens in circuit court at some point or another, whether I've had to deal with it on appeal, whether I've had to deal with it when someone's case gets reversed and I have to clean up a mess, or my current gig, cold case, you know, stuff that happened decades ago that are really powerless to change, but I now have to deal with. So I think just having that constant experience, the longevity of that exposure, and the fact that I've now, working with statewide, I've gotten to see an awful lot of ways that jurisdictions and judges in other jurisdictions handle things. It's not, I think there's an advantage to growing up and having a real good understanding of a particular practice, but I think that, much like everything else, the Supreme Court is going to change things up from time to time. I think those of you who are in civil order get it now, right now, with the new orders for pretrial that the Supreme Court has decided to impose. So that ability to see it, adapt to it, and when I don't know the answer, go find it, I would say that's it.
As a circuit judge, you may have to impose the death penalty. Would that be an issue for you?
No, sir. I've asked for it before, multiple times. If it's appropriate, in an appropriate case, it would not be. It would be a decision that I consider myself capable of making.
If this was a felony criminal case here and you've got to determine a sentence, as the judge, what factors or process would you follow in imposing a sentence?
Number one, there's, of course, the punishment code. The legislature sort of mandated certain things that have to be considered. Number two, there's the victim's, if it is a victim case, there's that to be considered before the Constitution requires that. So I think in addition to those two particular things, you start to look at the individual characteristics of each defendant. There's a reason we order pre-sentence investigation reports. What are things that you may or may not know? Here are those, as I said, sometimes people present very poorly on paper or in court or in a trial, or if they committed a felony, they probably had a very bad day. And so you hear that they are not, the person is not the sum of one particular set of events. So I think all those things play a part in sentencing. Sentencing has to be standard, but it also has to be individualized based upon the particular nature of each individual being sentenced.
In a perfect world, what do you think of sentencing guidelines?
I know that there's a bit of a conundrum at the federal level right now. You know, they're mandatory, no, they're advisory, no, we're going to follow them, no, we're not necessarily. I think guidelines are very helpful. They establish sort of ground rules for courts. I think Florida gets a balance a little bit better because you set outer limits and the judge retains a lot of discretion within those limits. I don't think sentencing discretion, I think back to, I used to work in the post-conviction area when sentencing was basically completely unfettered under the old pre-guidelines, pre-1989. I didn't get a lot of those. And I didn't think that seemed to work too well, just from a functional standpoint. And so I think it is useful to have those, I'll call them loose guide rails, but I think it is important also that judges do maintain a discretionary component to all of that. The federal ruling from the Supreme Court that sort of made their sentencing guidelines a little less mandatory probably helped in there.
You used the word impose when you said the Supreme Court imposed some new limitations or standards on trial judges. Do you find that bothersome, or do you find
It's part of the gig. I guess I didn't mean it pejoratively if it sounded that way, my apologies, but the Supreme Court, they make the rules for circuit court practice. That's the way it is, and then probably the way it should be there. We're elected and appointed to those positions for a reason. So no, I don't consider that a problem. I think sometimes the reason we have committees and things to talk that stuff over is because not every single, even judges, always knew every fact of at the end of that. But by the time the Supreme Court gets around the issue of ruling, I think most of these things have been pretty thoroughly vetted.
This is likely going a circuit seat in Volusia County, how would you approach the daily commute? Have you considered that?
Absolutely. I lived in St. Johns County and worked in downtown Jacksonville for 16 years and drove 40 miles one way every day for that entire 16-year period. Once I joined statewide, I've done a lot more travel. I've done the statewide grand juries that were based in Bartow and also another one in Fort Lauderdale. I spent 3 weeks as a cross-sworn assistant out of Key West trying to help them out. The commute itself doesn't bother me, although today, as you saw, it sometimes can cause a complication. I did try to plan for that, didn't plan for all of it. I even tried to anticipate bike week traffic. So no, the commute itself doesn't scare me, nor does travel worry me. I think they're sort of behind that is usually a question about, well, you haven't exclusively practiced in Volusia County, you haven't done a lot of that. How are you going to run a circuit-wide race? I think that's probably a follow-up question.
Yeah, how are you going to handle that?
You know, I got this before, and I decided that I was going to start asking around. And it turns out that a couple of years back, a circuit court judge in the Tampa area wrote a very informative article that appeared in, I think it was the Bar Journal, but it was just Hemera and the last name's Kovic. She said, look, one of the first things you have to do when you get in that situation, assuming you're lucky enough to get appointed, is you need to have within a month or 6 weeks, you need to have your plan for re-election, you need to have an accountant, you need to have the paperwork done, you need to have a committee, you need to have a campaign manager, you need to be prepared to do that, you need to start going to functions, you need to do those sorts of things. I talked to some folks who not only run themselves, but also organizations like the Fraternal Order of Police. How if I'm going to be running a campaign, how would I go about getting endorsements? How would I go about interacting with that? So took steps to do all that already. I am not naive to the fact that there's a process to all that. I believe that I'm well for that kind of challenge.
You applied previously to our commission, I believe for a circuit seat, is that right?
A couple times for a circuit seat in Owensboro County.
Why did you kind of stop applying and then pick back up?
Well, honestly, I got pretty busy over the past probably almost 3 years with two statewide grand juries back to back. I also had to start up a brand new unit in my office.
Is that the cold case?
It's
you
cold
wrote?
case.
Oh.
We did it from scratch. So
Why are those statewide? I'm just curious.
what the cold case?
Yeah.
We got a legislative appropriation. But part of the reasons are that there are a lot of jurisdictions. Now, Volusia doesn't fall victim to this so much, nor does Duval, nor does St. John's. But there are an awful lot of counties, in particular police departments, not sheriff's offices necessarily, police departments. There are 20,000 unsolved murders in the state, and a lot of them are due to the fact that they can't dedicate the resources to investigate them on a routine, ongoing basis. It's kind of, okay, we've got 3 detectives and catch as catch can, and if you happen to get extra time, here's a cold case that you can work on in your spare time. My unit is designed to help with that, and then secondly, our organic jurisdiction comes from cross-circuit crimes. So you'll get a person who's kidnapped from Orange County, dumped in Seminole, you'll find their body in a ditch in Seminole County. Neither law enforcement jurisdiction necessarily has 100% buy-in on that, and that's again something that we're sort of designed to address. That's what I do as I go around and meet with a lot of these smaller law enforcement agencies. I meet with some big ones about cases that they have either got a thorn in their side. We also are designed to help provide funding for testing. A lot of these agencies, DNA is, cops and lawyers maybe aren't quite as sophisticated with DNA as some of the lab people are. They don't know everything that there is out there to be able to do. We are designed to help bridge that gap, point out to a law enforcement agency, hey, you've got this piece of evidence. There's this new process over here that can, for example, extract DNA from bones better. Have you considered sending this? And if it costs an extra $5,000 and your agency doesn't have that money, the legislature gave us a certain amount of money that we can decide to spend to help agencies do that. So all those things.
And where are you primarily investigating those cases, what jurisdictions?
I've got everywhere from Key West to Apalachicola. Last week I was in last week I had a meeting with Fort Myers. I was in Hillsborough and I was also in Summit. And the week before that I was down in Orlando. I have cases filed in Hillsborough and Orlando. I have talked to some folks even as close as Daytona Beach. So we have cases, I think we have 6 filed cases in the year we've been in existence all over the world. We have investigations there.
So are those cases that you don't think would have been solved but for the creation of the division?
I don't know that they wouldn't have been solved. Some of them are solved. We're just trying to help move the ball down the road. Most of our cases are in the investigative stage. But I think a couple of ours would not have been, seem to have been dead in the water before we got involved.
What in your career you think would assist you in the non-criminal aspect of the job? And then what do you think you need to do to get up to speed on non-criminal things?
Sure. Fair question. The idea, you know, part of what I do is I work with bar committees. I've been on 2. Code of evidence is one that's dominated by non-criminal concerns. And so I learned a lot about the ins and outs of why evidentiary rules matter so much to civil practitioners. You know, that was educational. I would say that as far as finding, you know, we're coming up to speed on things, that's been something I've had to do even in the criminal context. I mean, you don't learn how to do 6 types of DNA without having, you know, I didn't graduate from college with that, gifted with that kind of knowledge. You got to dig in and learn. I didn't understand necessarily if there's ins and outs of death penalty law. So I guess my best answer I give to that question is there are new challenges placed in front of criminal practitioners every day that may not have anything to do with criminal. I will tell you that litigating these 2 state grand jury cases, it was an insane amount of motions to repress, fighting subpoenas, fighting with federal agencies. So a lot of that had to do, moved well outside the criminal arena. We were litigating administrative cases, we were litigating civil cases, all of that, just to get witnesses to testify or just to be able to publish evidence. So I have had, I do cross out of that, but the other thing is, look, sometimes you just got to roll up your sleeves, crack open the book and get to it.
Are you set on the circuit court, or do you have any interest in serving the county court?
You know, the first one I applied for was a county court position. And I got sort of sought some advice after I didn't make it out of committee for that. They said, well, your resume suggested the county position is not what you should be doing. You should be applying for circuit bench. So I took that to heart. Would I ever be interested in a county position? I mean, it's probably something I talk about. It's a little, like I said, that's the first one I applied for, so it's not that I've never had an interest in it, or denied that I've had an interest, but the one that's open is circuit. I think the one that best suits my experience is circuit. And so I'm not sure I want to say never, but I'll say not now.
You were certified previously once. What did you take from that process?
Ooh. That there's an awful lot of philosophical questions asked in Tallahassee. Less nuts and bolts, like kind of we've discussed here today, a lot more theory. I took that away. I took away that there are various, they gave us 30 minutes, I think, instead of 15. So the Tallahassee questions were much more focused on what kind of things motivate your decisions as opposed to day-to-day practicalities of being on a circuit court bench when you've got 27 colleagues on the bench reviewing 140,000 cases in the circuit filed last year. You know, I mean, I don't know that, I think that the questioning and the concerns that I experienced up there were a little bit different than people who are maybe a little closer on the ground here.
What would you do different if you to be certified this time, this go around? What would you do different?
What would I do different?
Yeah. If anything.
Well, I know that the questioners are going to be all completely different at this point, because the guy who Attorney General Uthmeyer had just joined as the governor's counsel the time I got certified the first time. So I think my particular different things that I would do here, I'd probably delve a little bit more into some of the theory, especially the whole Garner-Scalia theory. I think understanding having a quicker command of some of that would probably be useful. That'd be one thing. I think that probably doing a little extra research on the, I'll call it the issues of the moment. What is important to Tallahassee right now? What are they looking for in the courts right now? Our state has just filed a bunch of amicus briefs on a number of causes at the federal level. Those sorts of things I think would be useful to look at very closely so you can get a tone and tenor of where the prevailing philosophy is desired to be and what the position of the state of Florida is generally taking.
Any other questions?
Have you ever come across a judge over the years that you thought, gosh, he or she seems to be suffering from black robe highness? And if you have, what advice or observations would you make to that person?
Every lawyer probably has that opinion. I will tell you that sometimes I have initially thought that and then figured out quickly that that wasn't really the issue at all. I just give one example. I thought my side was treated very curtly and shortly in Broward County case. And I asked down there, some of my colleagues in that office, I said, what's going on with this? The judge had just lost his wife. So it was, I think, perfectly understandable. So, number one, have I seen that sort of behavior? I guess. I think it's probably more seen in TV or newspaper reports than it actually is in the courtroom, at least in my experience. But what would I say to them? I probably try and just get a little grace. I try and be sincere and ask, look, is it something that I said or did, or is it just you don't like this case? I found most judges to be fairly approachable about that. I think that's because, I got raised that way. A lot of the lawyers I used to practice with are not judges. More than a dozen. So I guess that's a long way to answer your question, but I'm not sure it's my place to lecture them, but I also try to understand where it's coming from.
What caused you to gravitate towards a statewide prosecutor?
Well, we got a new boss in the state attorney's office, and so I started looking around at what else there was, and got immediately invited. Literally, the phone rang the next day. So I talked to a few of the folks that were already there that I knew that had come from my old office before. And that's really what it is. They sold me on that place. And it's a decision. Don't regret it at all.
What is the 1656 award from the Office of Statewide Prosecutor?
16.56 is the enabling statute for the state prosecutor's office. I call it prosecutor of the year is probably too generic, but it's to recognize the outstanding performer in the office statewide every year. We have a statewide conference every year, do our ceilings, all that. Very much like the PMA does. We have our, and so that's when we decide that.
In closing, anything you want to highlight before we go?
Well, again, I appreciate everybody's time today. I hope that the idea that a guy can't. I've been a prosecutor, but I've also been a citizen of this jurisdiction for 30 years almost. This is where I am at. It's where I want to be. I'll reply. So I hope that what I've got on paper speaks well enough of me that I'll see if it give me a chance despite being tired today. So thank you very much.
Thank you.